What's up, guys? Welcome back to the shop. In today's video we're going to be making a Damascus knife, and we're going to be using 15 and 20 and 1084 for our stack. We're going to be interchanging it, and we're going to be going with a low layer, very bold design. One thing I like to do is I like to spray my billet with some WD-40 before I go into the forge, and this just helps protect it. It seeps into the different seams and it helps keep oxygen off, and it burns off into a thin layer of soot that theoretically helps the forge weld. I don't know, but I've never had any issues with it, so I am assuming it does do its job and it does it pretty well. And I choose WD-40 just because I like the smell of it. Some people will use kerosene, or some people I've seen use different kind of hydrocarbons. All of them are good. I just happen to use WD-40. With my billet forge welded, I'm going to start hitting it at a corner. That way I can make some C's or some crushed C's, and that way we can get some movement in our pattern. I, for one, don't really do this often, so it is a little bit of a new technique for me, but I'm trying to learn the rough basics to start doing mosaics. And most mosaics start off with some crushed C's that then become crushed W's, and then from there you kind of play around with it to make different patterns and stuff. Though it is easy to lose where you started from and what point you're going to, because essentially whenever you're crushing those corners in, you will eventually end up making an octagon, and at that point you can kind of crush the wrong edge, so it's very important to be very diligent and to make sure you don't confuse your edges. And now that I have it re-squared, I'm just going to work it down to a bar that is roughly 1 inch by 1 inch, so that then we can cut it and restack it again. With my pieces cut, I'm going to go ahead and etch them. That way whenever I stack them back together, I can make sure I get W's. Alright guys, so I've gone on ahead and etched them, and you can't really see it. I'm not sure if you can see it on camera. It's a pretty crappy etch. I think my etchant cup was dirty whenever I put my ferric chloride in it, and it just gave me a crappy etch. But here in person, I can actually see the pattern is going this way, this way, this way, this way. So I'm sure that's what they call making W's. So I haven't done this before. I'm just giving it my first attempt. Though I am doing a very low layer count, and that is because I am trying to do like a stacked low layer twist. I just want to see what it looks like. I wanted to have nice bold colors, so that's why I'm going this route. But we're going to go ahead and make some W's, and then we'll probably crush them the other way again. I'm not really looking for a mosaic type pattern. I'm just looking for a lot of movement because I want to see a lot of movement in the pattern. So we're going to go on ahead and weld this together and put it back into the forge, and we'll go from there. One quick thing before I go on ahead and weld this is that I have everything labeled. Whenever I cut it, I labeled wherever my cut joints were at. So here we have 2 and 2, we have 4 and 4, and here we have 3 and 3. So that's literally where I cut them. Well, I cut them here, here, and here, so I can have my 4. And the reason why I did that is so that the pattern can match up as best as possible. Like I said, it's really, really hard to see here, but the pattern's in there. And so the 2 faces that are touching are the faces that were cut together. So they're going to match as best as I could possibly match them. and hopefully they'll blend in well. But yeah, that's one of the things that I did to make sure that everything matched up as nicely as I could. And hopefully that helps the pattern not look too janky once I have everything forge welded up. So one quick mistake that I made whenever I started doing this is that I ended up forging them into squares 1 inch by 1 inch, when ideally I should have made them rectangles. That would have made them easier to stack one on top of the other, because it gives it a bit of a wider base versus the way I did it here, where I ended up essentially stacking and making a bit of a tower. I don't know if that makes sense, but whenever I'm making these, it's always better to go that route and make rectangles versus making square bars. Whenever we want to four-way it, it is better to do square bars versus rectangles. But for stacking, it is better to do rectangles versus square bars, if that makes any sense. With the bar squared up, I'm going to go on ahead and put it on an angle again and crush it one more time. That way I can build a lot more movement in the inside of the pattern, and hopefully we get a nice interesting pattern out of it. And once I have it re-squared, we're going to go back in with our kiss blocks, and we're going to go for a 1 inch by 1 inch square bar again. So as I was working the steel, I kind of decided that it needed to be a little bit longer so I could get enough to re-square it. And so I decided to go with 3/4 of an inch versus the 1 inch I was doing. Because the important thing to remember is that you're always going to have a lot of material loss on cutoffs whenever you're doing multiple forge welds, as I'm going to be doing with this project. Alright guys, so here are the pieces that I cut. And the ends are looking pretty nice. And so originally I was gonna four-way this like so ish, and forge weld it together with the intention of forge welding it together. But now that I see it, I kind of like it. So instead of doing this route and going with the twist, I'm gonna stack them. I'm gonna find where the patterns meet up the best, stack them, and I'm gonna forge weld them one more time, and then I'm gonna just cut a chunk off and forge a knife from that. I think that would be the best route to go with this. And we're gonna throw out the other idea, and maybe we'll touch that up in the future with a different steel. But I'm liking the way this pattern is running. Originally, I had checked out these guys, and these etched a little bit better. You can see them a little bit better. So these are the end pieces, and they flow pretty nicely together. Obviously, I have to make sure they match up correctly. I think this guy goes here. And they match up pretty nicely, and they follow along. And I think that would make a pretty interesting pattern with the big bold lines going through it. So this is pretty much what I'm gonna run for. So I'm gonna clean up. First I'm gonna figure out how I want it to flow. Then I'm gonna clean up in between and forge weld them together. It is a bit risky because it is pretty tall. And originally I did not have the intention of doing this. I was gonna four-way it. That's why I have about 3/4 by 3/4 blocks. But because of the change in idea, I'm gonna have to risk forge welding it like that, versus if I had originally planned to do that, I would have made them more rectangle versus square, just because it's a lot easier to stack. So that's the route we're gonna go. We're switching everything over, but I think this is gonna give us a really nice result. So we're gonna go that route. So this was one very sketchy forge weld, and that's because the tower was so tall, and that's what I was explaining before about stacking squares versus rectangles. But I managed to forge weld it, and it seemed like everything stuck fairly well. So this is about half of the material. I'm gonna cut it and restack it and try to add some more layers to it. That way we can hopefully get a better forge weld. It looks like I might have some lines in there that just might be some ghost lines, or might be some actual problems that we need to solve. So we're gonna go on ahead and cut it and restack it, and hopefully we can go on ahead and clean that up. And the billet also got substantially smaller because I used half for a different project. So this is enough to make one more knife, and it should be a pretty decent sized knife at that. Though I must admit I do not have the right tongs for this process. It is a bit of a pain to work with these. To fine-tune the pattern, I decided to do it one more time just to be safe, and hopefully we can get a more interesting pattern, since I will be working the face side versus doing any kind of tiling because we have such little material. So hopefully this will increase the pattern. And we'll do a quick test etch just to see what it is looking like. But remember that we're gonna be working the face down, so this pattern will be actually on the edge of the knife, and it will be distorted and stretched out depending on the size of the knife that we make. It's very easy to get confused on which side to press, so I ended up welding a little dot to the end of the handle, and that helped me to make sure that I pressed the correct side that I needed. The last thing I want to do is do all that work and then end up pressing the incorrect side and have a whole bunch of just random pattern Damascus versus the pattern that I was actually making. So with the piece pretty much where I want it, I start fine-tuning it with the hammer. That way I can forge in the tip, and with my tip roughly forged in, I'm going onto the press to start sectioning off my handle material. This will be a hidden take knife to better use all the material that I have, so we're just going to draw out that hidden tang. So with the tang forged out, we're going to go on ahead and start fine-tuning our shape. That way we can make sure we have a proper tip and a proper heel for the knife, as well as straightening out any little parts that have gone all a little wonky. And with that done, we're going to go ahead and use our cross peen and try to draw out as much heel as we can. Ideally, I want at least 2 inches on the heel. Anything over 2 inches is always better, but ideally whenever I'm doing a chest knife, I like to have at least 2 inches on the heel, and then the rest be proportionate to that. With my heel adequate, I'm gonna go on ahead and start stretching out the rest of the material to get as much length as I can. I don't want to forge it too thin because I'm gonna have to remove some material, and I don't want to have it be too thin when I'm done removing the scale and all that stuff. And now that I have it roughly where I want it, I just got to straighten up some stuff with the hand hammer and straighten up the knife to make sure nothing's twisting in an awkward direction and everything is roughly where it needs to be. Overall, it was a fun little knife, and with a couple of new additions I made to the press, it was a lot easier to section off material for the tang and draw it out and get everything roughly where I wanted to. The least work I have to do that is physically taxing, the longer I can do this for. Alright guys, so I got the knife forged out. I put it in acid for a couple hours just to help dissolve the scale. We still have a little bit of scale on there, but nothing too serious. So we're gonna go on ahead and go straight to profiling it and get it cleaned up so we can do our heat treat. It's pretty close to shape, which I'm happy about. So I'm just gonna clean up some lines, straighten up some of these little weird angles and stuff, and get a more predominant tip on there. Other than that, things looks pretty good, and you can see the grain popping through it. And I think it's gonna be a pretty interesting looking pattern. I wasn't sure if it was gonna be if I was gonna be able to save it or not, because it did have a couple cracks in it. I had a tiny one right here trying to form. But I think we're in the safe zone now, unless it just decides to explode when I heat treat. I don't know, only one way to find out. So the grind on this guy went pretty easily. I did have a lot of the material roughly where I wanted to, so the shape was already there. Only thing I really had to do was define the tip, and that's because I didn't want to forge the tip too thin and then run into issues afterwards. That's something I see a lot of makers do, especially if they're doing stock removal knives. They always leave extra material towards the tip. That way, whenever they end up grinding it, they don't over grind it or grind it too thin before heat treat. And I always thought that was a pretty cool idea. After the majority of the rough grinding is done, we go on ahead and go to our heat treat. Alright guys, so we are out of the temper. The knife is looking good. You can see that pattern starting to pop out of there. It's pretty nice and bold, which is what I wanted. And hopefully it comes out looking just as good when I'm done with it. Overall, I'm very happy with it. Came out pretty straight. I can fix any kind of little warpage with the grind. Nothing serious. So let's go on ahead and get on to our final grind. With some fresh belts, the final grind on this guy went pretty quick. I was also grinding other knives along with it that I'm doing on the side to do a batch drop here in the near future. Once I get them all done, they'll be tied to a video, but they won't be the main part of the video other than just the Damascus that I'm using. But that will be fun, though it is a lot of sanding. Alright guys, so I ran into a little bit of an issue. I have a couple of delaminations that I can't really grind out. That's a very, very tiny one, insignificant. I can grind that out. But I have this one as well that I was hoping would get a little bit smaller, grind out. But it did not. And most importantly, have this guy over here. That's a tiny little nick I can get out pretty easily. I got this guy right here that's pretty big, and I don't know how deep it is. And originally that was not really there. It was a much smaller line, so I don't know how deep that goes or how compromised the steel is. So to get around this problem, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a hollow grind or an S grind to remove all this material on the inside. It'll help with cutting performance and it'll make the knife lighter. And I don't really do it much because it's a pain to hand sand. But in cases like this, I need to do it so I can get rid of these D-lams, and hopefully that'll do it. If it doesn't get rid of the D-lams, no biggie. I just won't sell the knife and I'll just keep it for myself. But hopefully I can get those out. And overall, other than that, I'm really liking the shape of the knife, and it's actually very, very light. So we're gonna go on ahead and do this grind, and hopefully we can get these minor delaminations out. Well, minor, this one's a huge one. I don't know what I'm gonna do with that. So here I'm using a 14-inch platten. It's what we use to make S grinds or hollow grinds. I don't know, I always get them confused. I think they're the same thing, but they might not be. Nonetheless, I'm using this to go on ahead and hog off all that center material. And if you want one of your own, this was sent to me by RD Knives, and I'll have a link to their store in the description down below if you want to go on ahead and check them out. All right, guys, so I did what I could on this one, but I could not grind out those little delams that I had in it, especially this one. This one's really the worst one. I wasn't able to grind it. In fact, I think it got a little bit bigger. So it's not going to be really viable for a knife to sell, but I am going to keep it for myself and use it and see how much I like the shape and the way I did the hollow grind. And nonetheless, I'm still going to finish it because I do want to see what the final look is, but it has no confidence for selling. Nonetheless, it is a pretty nice knife, even with these minor defects. So I'm going to definitely give it some pretty good use in my personal kitchen. So now I'm going to go on ahead and hand sand it and get it ready for getting our handle done. Hand sanding these kinds of grinds really sucks. All right, guys, so we got our knife hand sanded up to 800 grit, so we're going to go ahead and start on our handle. For the handle, I got this piece of spalted maple. It is already stabilized, and I think the figuring is going to work well with it. It's going to give it some movement. And this piece is a little bit under an inch. It's a little bit thinner than what I'm used to using, but I want to try a different handle style. So I'm going to be playing with it. Since this knife isn't going to be for sale, I'm just going to play and, you know, make a different handle and see how I like the fit and if I like it thinner. So as some of you guys realize, I rarely do single wood construction, single block construction. I always do 2 or more. That is because it just makes it a lot easier and a lot quicker. And I've seen very many different methods used to be able to get the hole, and I've even seen what I believe Will Stelter's doing recently, where they're using pins to be able to pin the tangs in, and it gives you a nice clean finish while also making it a lot easier to get a consistent result. So I really struggled with getting this handle in there and carving out the slot exactly the way I wanted it, and that'll become apparent a little bit later whenever we're doing our grinding on this guy. All to say, it's definitely not as easy to be experimenting, but it's the fun part as well. And so with our tang pretty much roughed in, we're going to go ahead and rough the outline for this knife. I didn't really know what to make to do differently. This is a relatively small knife, so I don't really want to go with any kind of very contoured handle, but I did want to make sure that it was relatively comfortable as well. And I'm so stuck, and I really like the just straight handles, or the just slightly curved towards the butt end where it hugs your hand, that it was a little weird doing this guy and feeling it in my hand as I went along with it. Though fortunately this material is a lot easier to work with than some others, so grinding it went pretty quick. So now that I have the shape roughed out, all I'm going to do is just try to round everything off on the belt, and hopefully it fits nice and comfortably in the hand. Though in all honesty, I think my table's a little high because this dust was hitting me straight in the face as I was doing it. All right, guys, so I have it roughly shaped out. I'm liking the way it's looking. Well, the way it feels, I don't quite like the way it looks very much. It's kind of ugly. It's actually very comfortable. You can hold it pretty well on a pinch grip. Feels nice and comfortable, and if you hold it normally, it contours very well to the hand. One thing though is I made a hole. I made 2 holes. And the reason for that is because of these very long, thin drill bits. It's very easy for them to flex while you're trying to dig out that hole. And since my tang was pretty long, it came out to right around here. It's no surprise that it kind of deviated a little bit from the original path, which is one of the reasons why I do them in 2 pieces versus 1, because I don't have a set up where I can hold it very, very tightly and drill an entire hole the length of the tang. So wobbling and stuff like that, you know, it moves around. I personally don't care since I'm keeping this guy, so it's whatever. I'll just fill it in. But that would be a no-no if I was going to sell it. Other than that, it's a little ugly, but it's definitely very comfortable. I'll have to tweak it a little bit more. But other than that, it's very beautiful wood. So with the handle pretty much done, we're going to go ahead and etch our knife. I do the bulk of the sanding of the handle off screen just because it's just boring to watch. So once I'm done rough grinding it, I pretty much just hand sand it while the knife is etching. And we're moving on to our glue up. If you like the knife and if you like the handle, let me know what your thoughts are down below. Whether you like it or not, just let me know. I'm very on the fence about it too. But that's one of the nice things about knowing that this knife is not going to be for sale. It doesn't really matter. If it comes to it, I can just hit this handle with a hammer later on and put a different kind of handle on it. And even though it does have those minor details that I can't sell it, I do know that this is going to be one hell of a knife for my kitchen, especially with that hollow grind in that makes cutting a lot easier, basically effortless, because of the lack of drag and resistance that the knife has to go through. Overall, it was a very fun build. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. And if you want to help support the channel in any fashion, you can do so by hitting that subscribe button if you're not subscribed. And you can do it by leaving a comment and liking the video, and even hitting that little hype button when you like the video. That would be pretty dope too. And you can help support the channel and my builds by buying a knife if you want to spend some money. I have a lot of cool knives. Even though this one won't be for sale, I have a lot of cool knives that are available on my website that cut just as effortlessly as this guy. Well, maybe not as effortlessly as this guy, because this guy has a special grind on it. But they are very, very cool, very unique knives. And here is a final look at the final knife. I think the light handle with the dark contrast looks pretty good. I could have hit it with a sunshine cloth, but I kind of like the darker look to it, so I left it as is. And overall, it was a very fun build, even though it was a bit of a dud. Nonetheless, I enjoyed it very much. But as always, guys, thank you very much for watching. I greatly appreciate it, and I will catch you on the next one. Peace.